Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Craig Tappel, leader of Hub's North American construction practice. On behalf of Hub and all of our speakers, I want to welcome you to our webinar. Today, we will attempt to answer the $1.2 trillion question. How can all of us, our public, private institutions in partnership with construction, capitalize on the Infrastructure Act? The opportunity to repair and upgrade our infrastructure is critical to every aspect of our economy. We don't want to waste this opportunity. So welcome to today's seminar. A few just housekeeping items. There will be some documents on the left-hand side. You can drop down on documents and look for links or any documents we talk about during the presentation. You can ask questions during the presentation. We have accepted and tried to organize and think through some of the pre-submitted questions, but we'll also work to get through those, and any questions submitted that we do not get to, we'll circle back to at the end of today's session. So today, our agenda, we will focus on 5 things that you can do to prepare, really to understand the opportunity of addressing the big questions surrounding the IIJA. Where will the money go? What projects will be funded? When will the funds get here? How will these projects move through the system? How can you connect with public entities in their local jurisdictions to understand the specific opportunities and requirements in that region? 3, understand the impact on the private sector, direct, indirect winners, including the potential role for private equity. We'll also review the requirements to win the work, what to expect from a surety, risk management, and other perspectives. And lastly, thinking about connecting with professionals that specialize in construction that can help guide you through the specifics. These include attorneys, consultants, CPAs, insurance, safety, and other types of professionals. So joining us today, we have selected a group of speakers that we think you'll find very interesting. First, we have Dr. Wolfe. Dr. Raymond Wolfe is the Executive Director of San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, and he's going to bring the perspective of public entities responsible for moving the needle, choosing and delivering meaningful infrastructure improvements for all of us. We also have John Bivona. He's a Senior Vice President of Rasky Partners. John has a deep knowledge of what's in the bill and what's needed for companies and public entities to navigate through all the regulations associated with it. We also have Mark Mingalelli joining us from our private equity practice group. He's leader in New England, and he's going to bring the perspective from private equity markets, the expected direct and indirect opportunities associated with that. And then I'm going to cover things that a contractor may need to know to qualify for the work, for those who are both new to the public work and for those who are preparing to increase for it. So our first topic is bringing projects in focus. And Ray is going to bring us the perspective from the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. So I'll introduce Ray. Dr. Ray Wolfe is the Executive Director of the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. He joined SBCTA in April 2012 after spending more than 20 years with Caltrans, the California Department of Transportation. At Caltrans, Dr. Wolfe served in many capacities, including Director for District 8, covering both San Bernardino and Riverside counties. He began his career as an aerospace engineer at General Dynamics Corporation in Pomona, and then Rancho Cucamonga testing missiles. He really is a missile engineer. Currently, he manages a budget of over $1 billion and oversees the delivery of planning, design, and construction of freeway improvements, bridges, railroad crossings, expansion of commuter rail and transit services countywide, management of air quality programs, freeway service patrol, implementation of alternative fuel and energy programs, and advocating for countywide interests at both the state and federal levels. So welcome, Dr. Wolfe.
So thank you, Craig. Thank you to Hub also for sponsoring today's webinar, and thank you to all of you who have joined us here today. We are truly in the throes of exciting, albeit challenging times with the new transportation authorization, setting the stage for truly innovative solutions to transportation challenges. California is pressing quickly towards a zero-emission future. At the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, we are responsible to plan and construct a seamlessly connected transportation network. There are two primary drivers to our congestion and air quality concerns: housing affordability as compared to the coastal counties of Los Angeles and Orange, and freight traversing the port complex of Los Angeles and Long Beach. In fact, while the ports represent the gateway to the Asian marketplace, San Bernardino County is truly the gateway to America in terms of freight. All of this translates to the need to continually invest in highway and rail improvements to keep our economy moving and reduce air quality issues from idling vehicles. However, each state has unique requirements. California today is largely averse to adding highway capacity, so we have to be creative as we struggle to address growing demands from commuter and freight traffic. We are seeking ways to integrate alternative fueling stations into strategic highway widening projects as we prepare to meet California's mandate of selling only zero-emission vehicles by 2035. The image on the screen is of a rest stop, one of many across our state. We're working with Caltrans to convert some of these alternative fueling stations with private partners to operate them. The time is right not only for California in these discussions, but also given the focus the federal transportation bill puts on alternative fuels, the time is right for all of us to engage in this conversation. Next slide, please. Leveraging private interest to address mobility challenges is a key focus. The federal transportation authorization doubled the cap on private activity bonds, providing a tremendous boost for companies like Brightline West to invest in high-speed rail connection between Las Vegas and Southern California. The hub in Southern California will be in Rancho Cucamonga, connecting directly to the local commuter service we call Metrolink that feeds directly into Los Angeles and connects 5 other Southern California counties. As Interstate 15 is the primary eastern gateway to the rest of the country from a freight perspective, we are partnering with Brightline West to provide commuter service in the corridor from Rancho Cucamonga through the Cajon Pass to the high desert communities of Victorville, Hesperia, Adelanto, and Apple Valley, hoping to attract some of the growing commuter demand off of the highway and onto this train, thus freeing capacity for more freight. The federal transportation authorization is helping facilitate this partnership. In addition to increasing the cap on private activity bonds, it also opens the door for private companies like Brightline West to access federal grant opportunities. Next slide, please. Transportation planning is a decades-long process, unfortunately. For too long, we have used the same set of solutions to address issues in the network, largely because innovation leading to truly innovative solutions to mobility challenges lagged from other fields. However, over the past decade, we have witnessed a renaissance in technological advances geared towards the transportation sector. Autonomous technology, to me, is the most exciting innovation, but rapid advances in alternative fuels, among other innovations, are truly changing our landscape for the better. At the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, we are leading the charge, looking at innovative solutions to help improve mobility. I spoke of the partnership with Brightline West, which will provide an electrified zero-emission high-speed rail connection between Southern California and Las Vegas. We are also piloting the first self-contained zero-emission passenger rail vehicle in partnership with the Swiss rail car manufacturer Stadler and the state of California. This vehicle can operate on existing heavy freight and passenger infrastructure, thereby significantly lowering the cost to convert from traditional carbon-powered consists. The zero-emission multiple unit we call ZEMU does not require unsightly overhead catenary or dangerous third rail from which to draw power. Instead, it relies on a combination of hydrogen fuel cell and regenerative braking storage for propulsive power. The vehicle is being manufactured as we speak in Switzerland and will be unveiled in Berlin at InnoTrans in early September. After initial testing in Germany and Switzerland, it will be shipped to San Bernardino County next summer. This is really exciting news. We're also looking to construct a tunnel between the Rancho Cucamonga commuter station, where Brightline West will connect, and Ontario International Airport, a distance of approximately 4 miles. The cost of tunneling is less than surface alternatives we have explored, largely due to the right-of-way costs in the built environment. A tunnel also affords us the opportunity to introduce autonomous vehicles, such as depicted on the slide, because we can create a completely closed system. Environmental work has commenced on the project, and we are now exploring vehicle platforms and procurement options to deliver this exciting project. Finally, while my agency does not operate transit, we are responsible to fund those agencies that do across our county. Fleet conversion is a huge undertaking mandated by California as we again strive for a zero-emission future in just over a decade. IIJA will help us in this endeavor. Craig, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Appreciate the insight on these coming projects. And also we'll have several questions for you at the end, specific on how to access some of these projects and what are the opportunities ahead. So the next part is really focused on what you need to know about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And for that, we have John Bavina. He's Senior Vice President and Head of Rasky Partners Washington, D.C. office. He's served as trusted political strategist and advisor within every corner of political campaigns and the federal government. John helps Rasky's clients advance their policy, funding, and reputational objectives while overseeing Rasky's rapidly expanding government relations practice and the firm's DC office. Before joining Rasky Partners, John was most recently appointed to serve in the Biden-Harris administration during the transition period and during the campaign. In addition to his service in the Biden administration, John offers Rasky's clients perspective from the legislative branch, where he served as the first chief of staff for New York Representative Antonio Delgado. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Craig, and thanks to Hub International for organizing this today. So as Craig mentioned, want to take some time to talk about the bill and some of the top lines. I think the best place to start is that when folks hear of infrastructure spending, they think of just roads and bridges, but this bill is so much more than that. There's $1.2 trillion in formula-based and competitive grants that are out there. Out of that, there are about half of the money, $550 billion, is for new programs that haven't existed in the past. Those programs break into a couple of different categories here. So there's transportation, more of the traditional stuff that we think about. There's $284 billion in new funding for new transportation programs. There's $140 billion for clean energy and community resilience. There's $65 billion for rural broadband and broadband connectivity. And then there's also $7.5 billion in the bill for electric vehicles, in particular charging and fueling infrastructure. So again, some of those categories are within what we traditionally think about when we think about infrastructure, but a lot of this is expanded on traditional infrastructure as well. So, next slide, please. Washington is good at a lot of things, not good at other things. But one of the things that Washington is good at is creating bureaucracy, unfortunately. Just want to call everybody's attention to a couple of things here on this slide. One is that the White House did develop an infrastructure implementation task force. I think it's worth note that infrastructure implementation task force is being overseen by a former mayor, Mitch Landrieu, who really understands how this money needs to get into communities and how it can be used to really help better build infrastructure at the local level. There's also a new joint office of Department of Transportation and Energy and Department of Energy. Because of the way that a lot of this money is structured, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for transportation, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy to work together. And so there's a new joint office there to help on that front. And then also the Office of Management and Budget, which is going to be responsible for overseeing a lot of the rules around Made in America, and also the overall implementation of the bill as well. Next slide. A couple of important things that we've already learned about the bill, both from the administration, but also as it's begun to get implemented. Rural and underserved communities really stand to benefit the most from this bill, especially from those new funding programs that I mentioned. There's an office that's been developed within Department of Transportation, the Routes Office, that is specifically geared toward helping rural communities better navigate the funding opportunities that are in this bill. There's also the Justice 40 initiative, which by executive order ensures that over 40% of the benefits of government spending in the clean energy space goes toward disadvantaged communities. Equity and delivery is another important piece of what we know is going to happen here. The bill establishes DBE targets for each of the individual programs that are going to be implemented here. It also establishes a minority business development agency to increase access to those programs, and that agency is housed within the Department of Commerce. So, and the last piece that I think is important to understand here is that the administration has really put a heavy emphasis on public-private partnerships. They've made clear through a lot of their public statements up to this point that many of these programs are going to need to be implemented through public-private partnerships. The bill itself mentions public-private partnerships 42 times. And it also includes $100 million for technical assistance for communities to look into public-private partnerships. Many times the barriers to public-private partnerships are because communities don't have the resources to be able to seek them out. There's $100 million in funding over 5 years for communities to be able to look into public-private partnerships. Next slide. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of money here, and so in terms of the implementation timeline, it really varies from program to program. But a couple of things to look out for. One, now that Congress has passed a budget, all the spending for this bill has been funded through the fiscal year. And so you've seen over the course of the past couple of months a number of notices of funding for programs that are within the bill. We'll talk a bit later about websites and ways to kind of stay on track of or on top of where the notices of funding are and what the timeline looks like for particular programs. But in general, over the course of the next couple of months, you'll continue to see notices of funding put out. There are some notices of funding that have already been put out, and there are some that are going to come a bit later over the summer as well, into the fall. Next slide. Important to understand that in this bill, as many of you know, private sector access to funds in this bill really flows through public sector partners. Cities, counties, state government entities are largely the organizations that are eligible for these grant programs. In some cases, universities or university systems can also be eligible for the grant programs. In some cases, nonprofit, public and private nonprofit organizations or associations can be eligible for the grant programs, and Indian tribes as well. But the really important thing here is that regardless of what program you're looking at, as a private sector company, you're likely to need to partner with one of these entities that we've listed here in order to be able to access funds. Next slide. I'm going to go in a bit to the rules and strategies for forming the public-private partnerships that we talked about on the last slide. There are lots of different models, lots of different opportunities for public-private partnerships. We want to talk about electric vehicle charging infrastructure here as just one of those potential models. Again, there's a number of different models that could work, but we think that this is a worthy model to have a conversation about just as a case study. There's 34 states that have laws governing public-private partnerships. Some states do, some states don't, but 34 that do. Regardless of what those laws say, you always need to be able to point to delivery of a public good as a reason to enter into a public-private partnership. Next slide. So again, wanted to talk a little bit about the electric vehicle piece of the bill here, and really a public-private partnership model that works. There's a low-no program at FTA that we think is a great example of a public-private partnership. It's a competitive grant program for cities, states, and counties to allow them to get carbon-producing public transit off the road and replace it with electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. The program itself has gotten significant funding increases through the Iija, which I think is an example of why it's a public-private partnership that could make sense. Next slide. So what that looks like is that companies, BYD, Proterra, companies that produce electric buses are able to approach local municipalities and government entities and talk to them about the opportunity to chase the funds through the low-no program, and then support them in chasing those funds. Now, the companies are not the ones that are filling out the grant applications. The counties, the municipalities, the local entities are the ones that are chasing the funds. But there's the ability for the counties to enter into a partnership with these companies to then actually have the electric buses on the road. So just one example of a public-private partnership model that could work. Next slide. Requirements for joining a P3. A couple of things to note here. One, it's going to vary a bit depending on the state that you're in, also depending on the program that you're looking at as well. So, the notice of funding opportunities and some of the other notices that the administration is putting out will help to, in some cases, some of the notices that state departments of transportation are putting out will help you get a sense of what the requirements are, in an individual program. One thing that is important to note, though, is that the bill does address Made in America. So goods must contain greater than 55% domestic content and be manufactured in the United States. All manufacturing must happen in the US as we're talking about construction. And OMB is going to be providing more guidance around construction materials and associated inputs as well. So those are the Made in America requirements as we understand them today. Next slide. Just a little bit of background on our firm and where we fit in. So our work is really focused on helping both public sector entities and private sector entities enter into public-private partnerships in order to see the implementation of this bill move forward in a positive way. We do that by tapping into the relationships that we have across the country and also our knowledge of both the Hill side and the administration side of this process as well. So, next slide. A couple of the services that we offer in doing that, opportunity mapping and local partnership development. So helping companies understand what opportunities exist out there depending on the products that they have, and helping municipalities understand where some potential opportunities are in terms of grant funding programs to meet the needs that they have. Federal and state relationship building and intelligence gathering. Again, our firm has over 30 years of experience in the government relations space, and so deep relationships to be able to understand what's important from an implementation perspective and how to stay ahead of where the opportunities are. Grant application strategy. In every circumstance, as we discussed here, there's a grant application that needs to be put in. Private sector companies are not putting that grant application in. It's really the public entity that's putting it in, and so we have the ability to be able to help support that grant application. And then continued grant advocacy, making sure that, especially when you talk about discretionary grants, which is a lot of where this funding is, that there's support for particular grant applications that are put forth as well. So I believe that's it on my end. So Craig, I will go ahead and pass it back to you.
That's it for the slide part. Of course, we have some questions that are coming in and have already come in for you as well. So stick around for that.
Sure.
I'm going to tackle real quick the importance of bonding, risk management. If you want to be an approved contractor, specifically to our construction clients on a federal, state, or local level, there's a qualification process, and you certainly have to think about bonding if you've not done that before. So as an overview, the Miller Act is where certainly the federal act that governs a lot of what projects need to be bonded at what level. It's usually for the full value of the project. So many of the surety requirements do take back to the Miller Act. The IIJA expands the number of projects which are going to need to be bonded. Because it applies to more than just direct contracts with the federal government. It also has to do with any money that's coming through those funding mechanisms. But you also have to look to the specific jurisdiction where the work's going to be done. The Little Miller Acts are out there in each state. You can Google Little Miller Act for your state. And there might also be some local requirements of what surety requirements, what type of bonding you might need to put up to win this work. So bonding is essentially about protecting your balance sheet, maintaining your bonding capacity. It can be very important as we move through this to fulfill your fund. You know, when a surety is looking at you and thinking about why you might need this, of course they're going to look at fulfilling your obligation, your financial obligations. Are you prepared to complete work on time and on budget? Do you have the working capital, the cash, the liquidity, and the cash flow that are necessary to fund these projects? They expect bonding carrier expects that you've done all of these things. And are you also positioned for the influx of stimulus money, the additional work that you might be bidding on? And they want to know that you're prepared for the next wave of work, that you're working on things that you're qualified for, that you've aligned yourself with some advisors to guide your way. And they can certainly, in many cases, be one of those. And we think about how to maintain that relationship or build a relationship. And it's, you know, when you have a bonding company, it's all about an surety. It's all about building that relationship. You need to treat your surety as a partner and an insider. Transparency goes a long way with a surety. They want to know all the things that you're doing about management. They want to know that you're capable. In many cases, we also are always interviewing and lining up your next surety relationship or a second surety. And you know, for all the same traditional reasons, if you might need a backup surety, is if you sense any hesitancy from your surety or think you might outgrow their capacity that your current surety can provide. You know, you might be taking on more work. There might be more time between bidding a project and completing a project. These might be larger projects. You know, the cost to build a project today might be very different when these things come out. So that we always think of, from a surety perspective, the best time to negotiate a surety facility is when you don't need it. The market's still soft for strong clients from both rate, capacity, levels of personal indemnity or trying to seek waivers of that indemnity requirement. And, you know, it's going to be, we're trying to think of the resources. You know, what does a contractor need to know and what to expect, what kind of information? The National Association of Surety Bond Producers, they have a great guide. It is built for the 51 questions that you might need to know, the answers to those questions as a multi-page guide. So we're going to post that, a link to that guide from the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. And it's a great guide for everything. And I'll also post our surety landing page to provide some guidance on what you need to know from a surety perspective to be prepared for this work. So in addition to the bonding requirements, you're also going to have to think about what does it take to qualify from a safety and risk management perspective. There's going to be, in most cases, you're just like that bonding relationship, you're looking to pre-qualify, you're looking to qualify for the work. You know, whether you are a general contractor or a subcontractor trying to apply for it, want to understand the pre-qualification process. Pre-qualifying contractors reduces risk. It really does save time and money, and when people don't get injured, we have more satisfaction on the job. They get done better on time, on budget. So we always are guiding our customers through the steps to selecting a safety-conscious contractor. We'll send out a questionnaire. They may ask you for a statement of safety qualification. There may be some weighting in there. They're going to try to minimize exceptions. You might not fit the exact mold, but understanding what those exceptions might be. So we have, in addition to that, we have a contractor pre-qualification tool that we will make available. We'll put the link on to that website. You can download it for free, and it's how do you go through the pre-qualification process? And we do encourage all of our contractors to review it, whether they're upstream or downstream in the relationship, because that's how you can win some work. So more to follow on that. But we really wanted to add from Mark some insights on how the IIJA impacts the private equity marketplace. So Mark, can you, from the private equity perspective, can you give us some insights today?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Craig. So we thought it was important just to really layer in sort of the private marketplace, but really the private equities perspective, on the act and sort of what we anticipate going forward. And I'd say this is really a tale of two sides. First, there is certainly some pessimism out there. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention it. The act, although it certainly has so much money involved in it, there were folks that actually just didn't think it went far enough. There was talk at one point about perhaps having some form of tax credit or tax incentive. There was some disappointment, I think, around the fact that although that, as John mentioned, there was 42 times they talk about P3s. It doesn't require the P3. It only suggests that they consider it. Again, some folks were really hoping it was going to be more of a requirement. And part of that reason is at the end of the day, government still has access to the $4 trillion muni bond market, where that capital can be fairly efficient. So won't spend much more time on the pessimism side, and if we because there's no need to certainly sound the alarm just yet, because I think in the next slide it's more important to be talking about the optimism side. When we think about sort of what this act is really going to do, just the sheer scale of this act will certainly create winners and very, very few losers. When we talk about following the money, I can just tell you recently from a pure private equity perspective, we call it the big dogs, the big funds, large market funds are actually salivating. KKR just announced the closing of a $17 billion fund. It's the infrastructure fund. It's their fourth fund, and it's going to be focused really on clean energy. Brookfield, they're targeting a $25 billion infrastructure fund. Global Infrastructure Partners, or GIP, is targeting another $25 billion. Macquarie out of Australia, they're targeting a $7 billion infrastructure fund. And then Apollo just raised a $2.5 billion infrastructure fund. And there's others. We also know that when sort of the large market funds are this heavily invested and continue to be excited about the infrastructure space, we know that this will also clearly sort of drip right into the middle market and lower middle market, and those funds are going to be continually as active as well. I will also tell you, when we think about sort of the private equity marketplace, I've listed several different industries we think will be sort of direct beneficiaries of the act, although perhaps not all of them are intuitive. We always think about certainly construction related in the municipality space, but I listed several other ones here, and what I'd like to do is maybe just touch upon 2 or 3 of them in the limited time we have. I think the first one is the knowledge industry. So when you think of the construction related space, the amount of certification, training, accreditation that's going to be needed on the front end as well as on the back end, all of that is going to really be a boon for our private equity clients in and around the knowledge industry. And the knowledge industry is really a cross section of technology and training, right? So we think that will also then bleed into actually some human resources and HR needs and support, and how technology can really leverage things. Another area we sort of in concert with John's comments, the battery space, we know that there's billions of dollars there in and around the battery space. Just one example, there's a $750 million grant for direct small and mid-market companies called the Advanced Energy Grant. This $750 million is really designed for helping the supply chain issues where right now we seem to be a little bit overly dependent upon raw materials, abroad. And for those companies that were maybe in the coal, mining, coal power space, they can take this money and retrofit themselves and become players, in the clean energy space. And we just know that, middle market private equity firms will be, right there, willing to invest alongside and build and grow. The last one we'll touch upon is actually the cyberspace. And I think maybe to explain both the opportunity and perhaps, unfortunately, an issue. Last week, and I posted this on my LinkedIn, but last week 2 Dutch researchers won $90,000 for winning first place at the world's largest annual, cyber hacking conference. They won this a couple of years ago. They hacked into an iPhone. It took them several days, but they did actually hack into an iPhone. And I think going forward, they might tackle the Tesla next. But this year they won first place because up on stage in only a 2-hour period, they actually hacked critical software that is the fabric of the infrastructure ecosystem. And they were also quoted as saying this was the lowest hanging fruit and possibly the easiest hack they've done thus far. The point being that when we talk about, needing to infrastructure improvements and we talk about roads and bridges and innovation, the cyber roads and bridges, if you will, need just as much improvement and innovation. And that'll fuel tremendous opportunities in the private sector to offer those support services to all those infrastructure projects that are being sort of redone. At the same time, all those new and expanding infrastructure projects that we maybe all think about are going to require that same type of innovation and support. We know firsthand that that type of innovation in the private sector really fuels this economy, and we know that the private equity space will be well in support of that. So I think cyber is going to be a huge area of growth all the way across the entire spectrum for us. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass things over to Craig, and he can walk us through some of the Q&A that has popped up. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. So we really a lot of the interesting things to talk about are really more in the question and answer. And so I've trying to organize them into groups and think through them by subject. So the first one I'm going to shoot is to Ray, and it's really about several questions around where will we see opportunities posted, how quickly do you think are we going to see them from state DOTs, when will they be ready, and how will these opportunities be advertised? Ray, I think that was more appropriate for you.
Yes, thank you, Craig. So first of all, right, we're seeing a significant infusion of funds across the board, right? 20% increase in monies that are directed through formula to state DOTs in year 1 out of IIJA over the last distribution in fiscal year 21 from the FAST Act. Even more importantly, when you look at a state of good repair out of the Federal Transit Administration, that's an even more significant increase, over 50%. So a lot of dollars are flowing quickly through formula to state DOTs, and so you should expect to see projects moving quickly through the queue. And it certainly depends upon where individual states are, where individual agencies like mine are with respect to working through the project development process. But there's plenty of money to push projects out quickly right now. In state of good repair with respect to highway bridges, off-system bridges, an area that we really as a nation need to focus our attention and fix the deteriorating state of that inventory. There's a tremendous amount of money available there now. You certainly want to look at your state DOTs, look to your state DOTs. They probably all have online project delivery tools that are available to show you where they are in the process of delivering projects. In California, the self-help county model is used by 25 of our 58 counties. And that's important because we also use local tax dollars to leverage state and federal dollars. And so the bulk of the work that you see on the highway and rail infrastructure in California is driven by the self-help county model, which is what we in San Bernardino County are, for example. And so you want to look to our agencies, or look to LA Metro, look to the Orange County Transportation Authority. We all have online information available, so you can readily see where we are with respect to progress on putting projects out on the street, how big those projects are going to be, and all the information pertinent to prepare and plan for working with us.
And every public organization has a similar website that you can go look for and find and get on the list. Is that right, Ray?
I would certainly hope so in today's age, that everyone does. I can't speak for everyone, but I can tell you that everyone here in Southern California does.
Okay. So very much related to that, as far as, we think about bridges and roads. We certainly have seen, pictures of the collapsed bridges. They're certainly one of the motivations for the bill. So did you talk, John, about specifically about what was for bridges and roads, and improving roads and improving the current infrastructure, things we normally think about?
Yep. So there's a number of opportunities there. As I mentioned, there are traditional programs that are increased in terms of their funding here. And so, there's raise grants, there are other grants, there are the traditional, funding opportunities through Department of Transportation that are largely formula based. And so your best way to understand those is, similar to what Ray said, look out for your state departments of transportation who are going to be putting out notices on those particular projects. In some cases, those opportunities are going to flow down to municipalities, and they'll be putting out notifications about those projects as well. And so, really, as we think of the traditional buckets in terms of infrastructure, bridges, roads, railway, a lot of those opportunities are come through supplemental funding to programs that already existed and will flow through a formula-based perspective. So, and a great resource for folks who want to look to see what the opportunities are, just more broadly, rather than just in their specific communities, and just understand what all the programs are that are within the Infrastructure Act. I would just point folks to whitehouse.gov/build. It's a great tool. You can look up directly if you're interested in roads or bridges or rail or really anything, resiliency. You can look up what programs are out there. And then you can also understand what the timeline is for those programs, who can apply for those programs, what the total amount of money is for those programs, and some of the other factors that are important in terms of understanding the program as well. So I would just encourage folks, regardless of what you're looking for, whitehouse.gov/build is a great way to understand broadly what's in the bill.
Okay, great. And I have two questions that are a little bit more localized. I think, Ray, I'm going to shoot you the first one, and it's allocations to Southern California. And I think you touched on the California-based county model on Caltrans.
So the federal funds are going to flow directly to the state DOTs, and then they're sub-allocated at the state level to county jurisdictions like mine. And it's based on, each state will have its own process, and whether it's formulaic or whether there's some other process, criteria-based process. In California, we use more of a criteria-based process, although the local agencies still have a lot of say in what projects are moving forward. And I did touch briefly, in California, there are a total of 58 counties. 25 of us have actually enacted a local sales tax dedicated to transportation improvements. And we use those funds to leverage state and federal dollars to maximize our opportunities to really address the mobility challenges of a state that has a growing population and is a significant player in the national freight movement conversation, particularly here in Southern California.
Okay. And let's switch coasts for a second. And John, it was somebody asked about if you could provide any local insights on New York City, unique opportunities and challenges there?
Yeah. So certainly there's the traditional projects that we like to think about. I think the BQE is one project that a number of folks mentioned will probably benefit from these funds. There's the Staten Island Ferry. There's actually money in the bill to help ferry transit, and so would think as the largest ferry in the country that'd stand to benefit from this as well. And then I think that there are some other opportunities as well. I know that the Greenway network has been mentioned as an opportunity to really build out bike paths and walking paths within the cities. So that's an important program that could receive some funding from this bill. And then there's also storm surge resiliency work to be done as well. Again, beyond just the traditional infrastructure spending, resiliency is a key piece of this too. So.
Okay, thank you. And so I think I'm gonna take the lead on this next one. It was really just an overall question. Not everybody's gonna have to chime in on this one probably. And it's an overall of how's this gonna help my bottom line? How does this support the construction or other industries? And how can a small business better position themselves for the opportunity with larger entities? So it's, for me, and that's why I focused on the pre-qualification and the surety process. So even if you're a smaller business, most of these projects are going to require subcontractor bonds. So it's to get familiar with that if you're not used to this kind of work. But also, pre-qualification, it really has 3 objectives that are in there, and the reason we put out these models and talk about it, particularly with our smaller growing contractors, is they want to understand what process they have before they encounter it in the bidding process when they go to apply for this work with a general contractor who's won it, and what are the options to accomplish it, and to obtain the necessary information so that they can bid for these projects on time. But a lot of it is based on we want everybody to be profitable. We want and finding these other professionals, accountants who are used to making sure you're profitable, the surety teams who are used to working with you, these other consultants and attorneys who will help you draw up good contracts that protect your company. It's to build a team, also to find that that risk services answer, that safety answer. So it's the whole goal is to try to, as these projects move forward for you, is to not only be able to bid on projects, but to bid on them profitably. We don't want you to suffer from having a project where you didn't make any money. That's so the best way to position you, I think, and to approach these is to build that team so that when you do bid on this work, you do win some projects that you make money at the end of the day. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I would just add to that from from the public-private partnership perspective, having some system, whether it's internal or external, to really understand what communities are trying to navigate and understand the partnerships that they're trying to create in order to chase some of these grants or implement some of these grants, I think is important. And whether that's having somebody internally within your company that is on the lookout for RFPs or on the lookout for those partnership opportunities, or working with somebody, a consultant or otherwise, to help you understand what those opportunities are, I think that that's important. One of the things that I think is unique about this bill is that because there's a lot of spending in new areas, you are going to have communities that have opportunities that they haven't had in the past, and therefore they're going to be looking for new partners to be able to get into those opportunities. I mean, when you look at especially in the clean energy space, all of the opportunities that are out there for communities, they're going to be looking for new companies to partner with in order to take advantage of some of these programs. And so I think just being in a place where you're recognizing that, whether it's at the regional level or at the local level or even the national level, and you're understanding what the opportunities are, I think that that's the first step to actually benefiting from those opportunities.
Yeah, mostly for a smaller growing contractor, you're stepping off to do a different kind of work, is usually don't do it alone. Whether it's a broker or a consultant or an accountant, is most contractors don't have all these professionals on staff when they start out, when they start working on these opportunities. So access people like Hub, like John, like other advisors, because we have the resources you need in many cases to help. at least partner with you to get through it.
Yep.
All right, so we had several questions focused on DBE and DBE entities, made in America, foreign companies. So we're going to have two or three questions on this. And John, it's really the Buy America provisions. What are they going to have, impact they're going to have on getting money out the door? And it's kind of the opposite part of that. There's several foreign companies who really want to participate in this. Like we had a question from a Swiss company. I know I've also heard questions from Canadian companies. They want to participate and help us with our capacity issues, but they're also worried about this Made in America provision. Can you comment on that?
Yep. So OMB put out guidance actually just last week on what the Made in America provisions are. And so just top lines on that: one, all iron and steel used in projects are produced in the United States. All manufactured products used in the project are produced in the United States. And that means manufactured product was manufactured in the United States, and the cost of the components of the manufactured product that are mined, produced, or manufactured in the United States is greater than 55% of the total cost of all of the components of the manufactured product. So that's a lot of words there, but you know, folks can find that online as well. And then the last piece is that all construction materials are manufactured in the United States, which means all manufacturing processes for the construction material occurred in the United States as well. And so those are the guidelines that OMB has put out, and they've asked all the departments and agencies that are responsible for the implementation of this bill to ensure that they have in place. So
there was a follow-up to that asking about engineering professional services. So companies that may not be U.S. owned, but could bring engineering capacity to bear. Is there any limitations on that?
That's definitely something that would require a little further research. I think it's probably program specific. But.
Okay, great. Ray, I'm going to direct this one to you. Could you speak about DBE participation requirements? You know, the federal government wants to permit diversity goals to be determined at the state level. Will they? And opportunities to, you know, minority business owners, enterprises, and it's really, are there any restrictions out there that you're facing?
So this is an interesting area, and it'll be interesting to see how policy shifts within state DOT relative to this. Several years ago, under the FAST Act, there was an opportunity to do a pilot for bringing in local labor, right? So you could have you could set some sort of a threshold of, I want X% of the labor force to be from, you know, within this geographic region. And we actually were the first agency to embark on this pilot, doing it for a small interchange project on Interstate 10, just south of where I am right now in my office. But we quickly found out that it wasn't going to work because our contractor was a union contractor. And so the way the union works, right, is if the contractor needs 5 more laborers or 5 more, you know, whatever skill set, carpenters, whatever it is, they go down to the local union hall, and the next 5 guys are the guys that they bring out, right? So there was no way, absent a project labor agreement, to be able to bring that to bear. And so one of the lessons learned was, you know, that we all have great intentions of trying to hire the people that are paying the taxes, the people that are suffering from the construction in their community, to actually work on these projects, right? But there are still obstacles that we need to overcome, and that's going to take regulatory relief in some areas, and I haven't seen that yet. But you know, there's a lot of talk right now about minority-owned businesses and about equity, which is important. It gets back to, I think, in many respects, to hiring locally really addresses a lot of those issues for major projects, and we just got to figure out how to overcome those barriers. So there's more work to be done in this front.
John, it was a little bit more specific. I was going to direct this one to you, and it was really, how can a certified DBE registered in several Midwestern states reach a national audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, there are specific DBE targets for every single program that's being implemented here. I think the best place to go would be mbda.gov, and that's the Minority Business Development Agency that I also mentioned earlier. This bill created this agency within the Department of Commerce to help minority businesses navigate the process and help to get a sense of what resources are out there for them as they're looking to tap into new markets as well. So in addition to everything that you mentioned, Craig, in terms of being prepared to understand what it means to take on these opportunities and being prepared to understand what it means to chase some of these opportunities, I think the other place to go would be mbda.gov.
Cool, thank you. So I'm going to direct these next ones to you first, John, and maybe Ray will follow up on about the IIJA timing and really several questions about when the funds are going to be distributed and who's going to get money first, and when will the funds be available to begin the work awarded. So that's a really big question. So if you want to, and really somebody even going further that says so few people have an idea of who's going to get additional funding and when. So would you?
Yeah, happy to take that on. Obviously with $1.2 trillion, there's no catch-all for here's the date by which all the money is going to be out the door. But best to take that on in a couple of parts. The first piece is, I think I mentioned at the top, whitehouse.gov/build is a great resource to understand where the money is, when the money is going to be distributed, whether a notice of funding opportunity has been put out, what the deadlines are for applying for a particular grant, and then who can apply for the grant as well. So that I think is the first place to go. The second piece I would say is that there's a couple of different ways in which this money is going to flow. There's the formula-based funding, which Ray can speak to as well. That flows directly to DOTs, and it's going to go directly through states and from states down to the regional level and the local level as well. And so in many cases, those are the first projects that have gone out there. Most of those programs are the more traditional programs. Again, there's about $650 billion here that is just building on programs that already existed, and a lot of that's formula-based funding. So a lot of that's the first money to move. It's the money for roads and bridges and traditional infrastructure, as we all like to think about it. There's going to be other formula-based opportunities. The EV charging infrastructure is one of them. The states are actually responsible for pulling together state plans to decide how to deploy their formula-based funding, and based on that state plan, then funds will start to come from Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, down to Departments of Transportation at the state level, and that'll happen a little later in the summer. State plans are due by August 1st, and then money will start flowing from there. So there are kind of varying deadlines depending on the types of programs that you're looking at. But I think as a general rule of thumb, if you're chasing some of the more traditional money, some of that money has started to move already. And if you're chasing some of the newer pots of money, whether they're competitive-based funding programs or formula-based funding programs, some of those opportunities are a little later in 2022.
All right. And I think so what I'm hearing is a lot of the traditional funding, you go out and look now and in the very near future. A little bit behind that is very much like the projects that Ray showed during his presentation of the EV projects, the stations. Those are probably the next wave, but there's still time to reposition yourself, because this money's not flying out like a champagne cork.
Exactly.
It's slowly.
I'll give another example if I can. The Department of Energy actually has a $500 million in this program to help lower the carbon footprint of public schools across the country, and that $500 million is going to be flowing over the course of the next year or so. But they just put out a request for information for that particular program. It's a new program. They just put out a request for information where folks who are potentially going to benefit from those resources have the ability to be able to engage with DOE and Department of Education, Department of Energy a bit to talk about what some of those resources could be used for. And so that's an example of a new program that right now there's still the ability to be able to engage a little bit with the departments that are going to be implementing that program. And then I'm imagining we'll see a notice of funding opportunity here shortly thereafter. So
So we had some questions around, what do I, as an HVAC contractor, as an electrical contractor, when will these opportunities be for me, or a green buildings or other things? And I think those are coming. They're just a little bit further away. Is that right?
Yeah, some of them are already out there, and some of them are a little further out. But I think that the overall, the important message to take here is that there's lots of opportunities in that space. There's billions of dollars in this bill for cities and counties and municipalities to reduce their carbon footprint. And you certainly think that folks in the HVAC space and lots of other spaces will benefit significantly from that. So, again, would point folks to whitehouse.gov/build as a good opportunity to be able to get a sense of if you're interested in a particular program, when that program's notice of funding is going to be put out, and what the requirements are in terms of application. So.
All right, and so there was one last group, and it's really, I think, Ray, you may be appropriate for you, of how do we have to think about construction differently, and delivery models and partnerships between public and private, not just P3 partnerships, but the way we approach construction. Is there a way to think about how to do this in a more efficient way, in a more partnership way?
Yeah, I think, certainly we need to be doing everything we can to try to address mobility challenges that we face within our respective areas. And the only way to do that is to engage as many minds around the table as possible, and looking at any and all procurement options, and trying to match the right one to a particular project, depending upon the project's goals. Here in California, my sister agencies, the self-help counties, have been very active with advocating at the legislative level to make sure that we have every potential procurement tool available to us, and then trying to match those with the appropriate project. And I think in my presentation, I really highlighted that we are really trying to look at innovation, whether it's technological innovation or whether it's procurement innovation. Great project again is the high-speed rail connection from Vegas to Southern California, with a private company coming in and proposing and partnering with them to help to solve a commuter link challenge that we have, that if we can solve it, will actually open up the corridor for additional freight. The freight volumes coming through the ports of LA and Long Beach aren't reducing. You keep hearing reports on a quarterly basis of record volumes. That's not going to change. And so we've got to really, look to innovation and look to private partners to help us solve these problems. We can't do it alone like we thought we could in the past.
Yeah, and I think I heard you talk about the hard bid environment. If we're worried about the capacity of labor and capacity of materials and the length of the time it will take to complete these projects, and if there will be delays, and then we go out and tell people they have to hard bid all the jobs, that can create quite a conflict and drive costs up quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's a really daunting conversation to have. So, managing a public agency, we have a responsibility to manage our public dollars to the greatest extent possible. And so when I go to my board of directors and I say, I'm going to build project X, and here's how much it's going to cost, it's important, right? It's important that there's certainty. So one of the things that we've been doing internally at the staff level is looking at, these mega projects that we have, and trying to figure out how to parse them into smaller projects that have less lead times, right? So the construction time is shorter, which helps to address the material and labor shortage problems, because it's a smaller chunk of time that you're dealing with. And to me, that's probably the easier way to address this, but you can't do that on every project, right? And so, we have to have that difficult conversation about, do we index certain things? And we already do in California. We index asphalt based on the price of oil. And, there's ways to do that. But, a board of directors who's directly elected, has a responsibility and a duty as well. And so it's a challenging conversation, and I don't have all the answers today.
I don't think any of us have all the answers. I know there has to be a way to limit, either reduce that limit that risk, both from an amount, a time period, some way makes it something you can chew. You can't eat the elephant all at once. So, well, I think we covered quite a few topics. I want to thank our speakers for really addressing so many topics and really trying to take this on all together. And thank you for participating in our webinar. I think it was informative, it was useful, and good for our audience. There will be, if you need more information, if you feel like there's something we did not cover, of course, direct you to our website. We have lots of resources that are there, but you can email me or put your questions in the survey in the section at the end, and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you found this very informative. Thank you.